This is the Breaker.news podcast for the week of March 7th, 2021. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the Breaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 176. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support the Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. The Is It Just Me commentary. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And the Big Deal feature. 1 year after the beginning of the biggest time out in sports history, when the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus pandemic on March 11th, 2020, sports leagues shut down operations and postponed or canceled games and championships. On this edition, we welcome back our guest from March 2020, College of the Holy Cross sports economist Victor Matheson, to look at the year that was. Now, is it just me? Is it just me, or did it take TransLink way too long to tell the public and its own staff the details about the ransomware attack that happened in early December? 3 months later, on March 2nd, the Transit and Roads Agency held online information sessions for current and former employees whose personal information was stolen by cyber criminals who may be from Ukraine. This is the sound of interim CEO Gigi Chen Kuo.
So in late 2020, TransLink was the victim of a sophisticated cyber attack. And during this incident, criminals breached our organization's computer network and illegally accessed certain files. We are taking this incident very seriously, and we're actively dealing with it still today. Once the threat was first detected, we took swift and decisive steps to shut down nearly all of our computing systems in order to contain the threat. We also immediately launched an investigation with the assistance of third-party cyber experts as well as law enforcement agencies.
This is Chief Information Officer of TransLink, Kurt Pregler.
As criminals are trying to take advantage of the pandemic and so many of our employees working remotely. Since the start of the pandemic, TransLink has seen a 261% increase in spam emails and a 383% increase in IT security investigations. We fell victim to a very new form of ransomware called egregor. It emerged in late 2020 and quickly claimed several high-profile victims in only a matter of months. These included international bookstore Barnes & Noble, major retailer Kmart, and most regrettably TransLink. Many of you on the call today will recall that this past summer, employees who have corporate email accounts had to complete cybersecurity training focused specifically on how to spot a phishing email, something we require to be done every year. Yet despite all the employee training, all the investments, and all the strategies we had in place, this novel and sophisticated attack still occurred. Once the attackers were able to gain access to our system through that calculated phishing email, they were able to deploy a very sophisticated ransomware attack that spread rapidly.
TransLink broke its silence, but over the last 3 months, how much trust and confidence did it lose by deferring to silence and secrecy? What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In Apple Daily, China's state media sings praises of homegrown pineapple despite selling Taiwan species. The latest Beijing-Taipei conflict has been fueled over Taiwanese pineapples, as mainland authorities banned the import of pineapples from Taiwan, blaming harmful pests that had been detected in recent shipments. In Taiwan, lawmaker Chen Ting-fei slammed former President Ma Ying-jeou, who took office from 2008 to 2016, for bringing Taiwan's advanced planting technology, agricultural management experience, and high-quality varieties of produce over to mainland China. In Taiwan news, Taiwan ranked second freest in Asia by Freedom House. Taiwan is behind only Japan in Asia and tied for 7th place around the world with Estonia, Germany, Cyprus, and Iceland. The report praised Taiwan's, quote, vibrant and competitive democratic system, end quote, for enabling the peaceful handover of power between rival political parties going back to the year 2000. It also described Taiwan's protection of civil liberties as, quote, generally robust, end quote. In the New Zealand Herald, he hits and he misses. Man tries to photobomb Tsunami live reporting, fails. A young man who pulled his shorts down during a live reporting of the tsunami warning in New Zealand has failed to get his bare bottom in the news. The man was on screen during TVNZ's live coverage of the tsunami warning in the Bay of Plenty following the 8.1 magnitude earthquake in the Kermadec region when he decided to pull down his shorts and bear it all on screen. Except he failed. The man miscalculated his angle and placed himself right behind the reporter, whose body unintentionally shielded everyone from seeing the random man's buttocks. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, 4 Oregon hotels will pay $105,000 to settle wildfire price gouging allegations. The hotels were ordered to reimburse at least 100 customers to settle allegations of price gouging during last September's wildfires. The hotels are the Capitol Inn and Suites in Salem, Le Chateau Inn in Florence, Roadway Inn in Corvallis, and the Days Inn in Roseburg. Those were the offending hotels. In the Seattle Times, law enforcement, firefighters, grocery workers to get COVID-19 vaccines in March. Around March 22nd, the state will open up doses to Phase 1B's second tier. That includes law enforcement, firefighters, and corrections staffers, as well as workers in public transit, grocery stores, food processing, and agricultural sectors. Also included in that phase will be people over 16 who have a disability that puts them in a high-risk category or who are pregnant. Washington is approaching 1.8 million jabs. And check news. Spaz, the Campbell River cat, comes back after 4 years. Spaz went out of his kitty door one day in July 2017 when his family was having a wedding party in the backyard. He didn't return that night like he always did, and after a few days his owners began to worry. In January of this year, Spaz showed up at a mobile home park about 7 kilometers away. A resident of the park had fed the skittish cat for a few days before calling the SPCA. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. This is the Big Deal feature on the Breaker.news podcast, looking back at the biggest time out in sports history. When the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus pandemic emergency on March 11th, 2020, the world of sports shut down. The NBA first, and then they all followed, with postponements and cancellations. Anyone who invested in sports or derives an income from sports was affected when the industry stood still. Slowly but surely, sports did return last summer and fall in bubble formats or in stadiums without fans. We're joined on the Breaker.news podcast with Victor Matheson, professor of economics at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. He's a world-renowned sports economist. He was our guest in March of 2020 as the world of sports was changing before our eyes. Victor, 1 year on, what has been the biggest surprise for you, the biggest change for you as someone who watches intently the business of sports?
Certainly. I mean, I certainly remember talking to a year ago, and I think at the time, we feared that this could go on a long time, and unfortunately, it really has. In some ways, it hasn't been a surprise that it's lasted as long as it has, but it was hard to really wrap our minds around that a year ago, that we would still be here, a year from now without things being back to normal. You think about, in some ways this has gone on so long. In other ways, the fact that we have vaccines being rolled out, less than a year after the pandemic has started is, really a testament to how remarkably fast that we've reacted to this. This is, getting back to normal at all wouldn't be something we'd even be thinking of, a generation ago. But wow, has this been the longest year in, I think, a lot of our lives.
Major League Soccer, the NBA, the NHL, they were all back by summer. Although in different formats, they did eventually all award their trophies. The Masters switched from spring to fall, the World Series happened, and so did the Super Bowl. The Grey Cup didn't happen. The IOC hopes to hold the Olympics in July in Tokyo 1 year late. Which of these was the biggest victory in the business of sports, and which sports league or property do you think has lost the most in the last year?
Yeah, so and let's also throw in the WNBA and the NWSL in there. Also, teams that came back first. The National Women's Soccer League was actually the first league to come back in any fashion at all in the United States. So let's not forget about them. So, in terms of pandemic management, the WNBA and the NBA both did extremely well. They went into a bubble, and once they were in that bubble, that was a secure bubble where, in fact, we had very, very little in the way of cases being reported after the initial move into the bubble by both of those leagues. And Major League Soccer was largely like that as well as the National Women's Soccer League. So these leagues did very, very well in their bubbles once they went in. In terms of being able to sell a product, the NBA and in particular had the disadvantage that they're trying to sell their product in the summer when people aren't used to watching sports. The Kentucky Derby, the same thing. It's just not the same watching the Kentucky Derby in August as it is in May. And of course the Stanley Cup is in the same boat there. We're not used to watching hockey finals in August and September rather than in June. So I think there was a lot of issues of people just seeming to be out of place. This is not normal for us to be watching this. And we did see ratings suffer across all leagues there. As you mentioned, college football was a complete disaster from every standpoint. Huge numbers of teams didn't come back at all. Those teams that did come back were very, very spotty in being able to play due to outbreak after outbreak after outbreak. Most of these places did not have significant crowds in place. So that did not work well at all for them. The National Football League was probably the league that seemed most normal in that they played in the same time period that they usually play in. They got most of their games in roughly on time, although again, they had a huge number of rescheduled games, but by the end of the season, they had gotten everything in. That being said, they had a kind of successful Super Bowl. The game was not great, but it was at least fun to watch. They only had about a third capacity in the stadium because of social distancing restrictions. But even with a relatively normal looking season, they ended up with a Super Bowl that had the lowest total number of viewers in over 15 years. And as a percentage of the population watching, the overall rating, again, that's the percentage of the people tuning in, lowest rated Super Bowl since 1969, the lowest rated Super Bowl since Joe Namath beat, with his Jets, beat the upstart AFL team beating the NFL in just the third Super Bowl. So, this is not good at all. The World Series saw their lowest ratings in decades for the World Series. This continues a downward trend for Super Bowl or for World Series ratings, but a real big drop off. And of course, the NBA also had very poor ratings. So it is not looking great for people tuning in. And of course, that's better than getting nothing, but they've lost, almost all of their in-person revenue. And again, people didn't seem to want to tune in a ton outside of, the live.
I asked Victor Matheson whether the public will have the appetite to return to stadiums and arenas in big crowds, even when vaccination reaches herd immunity. If so, will the sports fans have spending power? Is the economy going to sustain sports? How soon can it get back to normal?
So you bring up a bunch of great points there. So first of all, I'm fairly optimistic, at least in the United States, that by fall we will see a roughly normal world. I think fall of 2021 will look a lot more like fall of 2019 than it will fall of 2020. Obviously, as an academic who teaches school and has been remote now for almost 1 year at this point, this is something I'm obviously personally highly hopeful for. I should also point out that Center for Disease Control star Anthony Fauci is a Holy Cross alum. So I'm hoping our alum will be able to get us all back into our colleges and universities, as well as lower levels of education here. The real question, though, facing sports leagues is, have we lost the taste for going to these things? So, the grocery stores we're going to have to go to, and we're going to want to have schools back in session. The question is, these things like going to big events, going to music concerts, going to sporting events, have we lost the taste for those? And remember, sports relies in huge ways on getting people addicted, right? And we know that's the case because, I mean, it's not just entertainment. It's about that addiction, right? Or else, why would someone say, oh, I love the Canucks, but I hate the Canadiens, right? They're, from an entertainment standpoint, they're producing the same product, but we know how much people care for their particular team, even though, a shot coming from the blue line made by the Canucks is fundamentally not much different than the same one coming from the Maple Leafs, but of course we care about them a whole lot differently. So has this year off given us a time to say, you know what, actually, I don't know why I was ever that excited about sports. It's given it time to kick the addiction, and we'll have to see what happens there. We do know in past times where we have taken a timeout from sports, the fans have come back. For example, the multiple strikes and lockouts in the NHL and the NBA. But in all of those cases, the fans have returned quickly once sports restarted. Obviously, this is a little bit different deal. It's a longer break than we've seen from other things, and it's also a break that makes us be concerned about, do we want to be in large crowds? It used to be that, of course, I want to go to a sellout Stanley Cup game because the atmosphere and excitement of the crowd makes the event exciting. The question is, how long will it be before people say, this crowd is exciting rather than threatening? And we'll have to see how quickly that happens. Obviously, the more people who get vaccinated and the more people around them who are likely to be vaccinated will help with that. But the question, that's the $1 million question, or I guess when we're talking about North American sports leagues, about a $55 billion question. Are people going to come back in droves once they have that chance to?
Victor Matheson's research has considered how sports impacts local economies. It does, but it's much less than what the sports industry boosters say. When the pandemic hit, people had fewer places to spend discretionary income. Will this pause, this timeout, give you a chance to test that research and to look at the economic impact of this big timeout, as well as looking at going forward to see if the money does come back?
There's a bunch of interesting macroeconomic things here, and one is that, of course, this pandemic has been absolutely devastating to people whose livelihoods depend on the leisure and entertainment industry, right? That's people in entertainment like sports, in entertainment like movie theaters, and music industry and the theater industry. Also, obviously, the restaurant industry has been decimated. That being said, huge number of other types of industries have been thriving here, and what's going to keep people from coming back to sports is not their wallets, because in most places in the United States, as well as Canada, I presume, people's wallets are actually fairly flush on average. Again, not to discount the 10% of the population who's had extremely difficult time with their industries being phased out completely. But for the rest of the population, in fact, wallets are pretty flush because incomes have not fallen that much, and the number of things that you can spend your money on has fallen by a lot. So, for example, in the United States, total amount of accumulated savings has gone way, way up. So people have a lot of pent-up demand, and people, are likely to have the money to spend on things like vacations and restaurants and sports tickets once it's safe to come back. The question is whether they will have that interest to do so. And the question is, again, now that we have shifted from going from one place to another in our spending, will we go back to our old spending patterns? One example of what a lot of people have done here is, if I'm going to be cooped up for months at a time with the pandemic, I might as well upgrade my subscription services, my Hulu, my Netflix, my Disney Plus, but also I might upgrade my television to a bigger, wider screen. And of course, this just continues a decades-long improvement of the sports watching environment in our own homes. And at this point, there's just no question that watching a sporting event in your own home is just such a better experience on most lines than we're seeing than going in person, because again, widescreen, high def. You get a million different replays. You have the comfort of your own home, and of course, the only thing bringing us back to a live thing is not being able to see the game, but the atmosphere of the game. And obviously, have our thoughts about being surrounded by 80,000 screaming fans changed a lot, and they certainly may have.
That was Professor Victor Matheson, sports economist at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. Join me on next week's podcast for more from my interview with Victor Matheson about the impact of the pandemic on the world of sports and what's next when we reach herd immunity.
We're all in this together, and we've got to brave this stormy weather.
Virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to someone who's made a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to the late, great Walter Gretzky, the great one's father who passed away last week. Wayne went to Hollywood, but Walter was always a proud citizen of Brantford, Ontario, whose biographer was the late great BC sports writer Jim Taylor. In 2012, at the Vancouver Convention Centre, Wayne revealed in an emotional speech that his father Walter was diagnosed earlier in that day with Parkinson's disease. But in typical Gretzky fashion, he kept battling. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send us an email to Bob at theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca.
So I'm very happy that I'm going to get my Moderna shot today. And I wanted to tell everybody, I think you should get out there and do it too. I even changed one of my songs to fit the occasion. It goes, vaccine, 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 vaccine. I'm begging of you, please don't hesitate. Vaccine, 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 vaccine. 'Cause once you're dead, then that's a bit too late. I know I'm trying to be funny now, but I'm dead serious about the vaccine. I think we all want to get back to normal, whatever that is, and that would be a great shot in the arm, wouldn't it?
Those are the sounds of country music legend and actress Dolly Parton on Twitter. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of March 7th, 2021. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on March 7th in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell got the patent for the telephone? Now you know. Send me your feedback and send me your story ideas to Bob at theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. That's patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. Until next week.